So the speaker is Dr. William Davies. He is a consultant psychologist and head of applied clinical psychology at the APT. Post-qualification courses written by him have been studied by over 125,000 people, meaning that his input has influenced interventions with literally millions of people. So on that bombshell, I am going to pop you over to Will now, who is going to tell us about APT's higher order therapy. All yours, Will.
That's lovely. Thanks, Amy. And hello, everybody. So yes, the APT's higher order therapy is very straightforward because it looks at the higher order factors that occur across therapies. So it doesn't matter what therapy you do, you always have to do a good assessment, and you should always do a good case formulation, and that's what we're talking about today. And equally, you should do evaluation and so on and so forth. So we look at the most effective elements that are in approaches such as CBT, DBT, ACT, and so on. So for example, you might say, well, in DBT, the main thing is to teach the patients the skills they need, like emotion regulation and distress tolerance and so on. You might say that's the most important. Well, there's no reason why we shouldn't do that, whatever therapy we're doing, in higher order therapy or anything. You might say in ACT, you might say that the key thing is to live by principles and values and so on. And equally, you needn't confine that to ACT. That can be right across the board. So the aim is to master all the main effective elements of psychological therapy, wherever they come from, and really build them into a nice integrated approach. Nice picture, by the way, how it flows into one thing. Lovely. And build them into an integrated approach. So today's topic is case formulation. And I'm delighted we got such a big turnout, actually, because it is just so important, case formulation, because it is the making sense of information we get from the assessment. And any more information we get as the sessions go on. It is one of the key pillars of quality control, of regularly delivering what we try to deliver. It's a long audio, it's 30 minutes long, and tests our concentration, especially for those of us with a touch of ADHD. So it's a 30-minute long one, and it is disconcerting because as soon as Amy touches the button, it suddenly goes into kind of studio quality, but don't worry. It's still me and Amy just here. So as soon as you put your questions in, Amy will stop it at the right moment and be your spokesperson, and everything will be okay. So, big question though, is can you find the right button to press?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. Well, I hope I'm going to do that in a second. But we have got a couple of big bombshells today, haven't we? We have got that normal bombshell is that the recording is available for everybody, as we've already had lots of lovely questions. So Mark puts that up by the end of the week on the website. But the second big news is that if you attend the whole session, you will get a certificate after it today, won't you, Will?
Indeed so, yeah. And I think the details about that are at the end, aren't they?
Sorry, yeah, we've already had lots of nice questions about that already. So I just wanted to, and thank you, Kayon, you're already very excited, so that's nice. So yeah. Recordings all available, so don't worry about that. So I'm going to try and press play, but as always, please pop your questions in. We love questions, so type them away and I'll pop them to Will. Okay, here goes.
Hello and welcome to the APT's session on case formulation. One of my grown-up daughters likes doing jigsaws, and in fact, she's rather good at them. So what she does is, she has a nice big table to do them on. So what she will do is what you do when you do jigsaws, namely to pour out all the pieces onto the table, ready to do it. So for example, it might be a nice country scene by Constable or whoever, with some pieces with blue sky, a few fluffy white clouds, green grass, brownish water, perhaps horses with brown, black and white bits and so on. Of course, in fact, it's just a load of jigsaw pieces by then. But then, just to make it more interesting, she gets a second jigsaw, roughly similar, the same sort of size pieces of blues and browns and greens and so on. And then she turns that one out as well. So now she has a whole load of jigsaw pieces, some of which are part of one picture and the rest of which are part of the other picture. But there's no telling which is which because they're all jumbled together. She loves that, but to me it seems like torturing yourself. It seems to me that life has enough problems quite naturally without deliberately adding to them. Which is strange, because I love case formulation, and that is remarkably similar. A person comes to you with their problem and tells you all sorts of things about their life, including their problem. Some of the things they tell you, or even many of them, might be partly responsible for causing the problem, or at least for keeping it going. But many of the things they tell us may actually be part of a completely different picture, the picture of a good, healthy life. And it is sometimes a real task to sort out which bit of information belongs in which picture. Is it part of the problem, or part of the good normal life, or even possibly part of a third picture, the solution to the problem? So it is a fascinating task, and it's the one we pick up when we do a case formulation, making sense of all the information you gathered. And actually, maybe I shouldn't say when we do a case formulation, because we should do one virtually always. It is a crucial part of therapy and one of the pillars of quality control. I've put a case formulation form in your resources. So if you're sitting at your desk or sitting in an armchair having a nice cup of coffee, then you can have that in front of you, if you want. Meantime, if you're driving along in the car or on the train or out running, I'll describe what's there and talk about it lots more than is written on the actual form. So you can just relax. Not if you're running, you can't, but you can just relax and match up what I say with either yourself, if you like, or more likely one of your patients. Maybe the one who's on your mind most at the moment. I think there's always at least one patient who's taking up more mind space than anybody else.
Sorry, Will, just a quick one. People are asking about the form. That is associated with the course that this is normally with, which is a paid for course. We can't give it out as the freebie, but are you able to describe the form a little bit, Will?
Well, it's okay, actually, as long as people have got a bit of paper by them. I do actually run through the form bit by bit, because it's kind of designed for people who aren't necessarily by a desk even, you know?
Yeah,
so,
fabulous.
Yeah,
so should people not worry?
Not worry, yeah.
No, okay, don't worry, everybody, okay.
So maybe that one. So in the first box on the form, in the first box, you write down the problem that a patient has brought to you. It's a good idea, just as we said in the assessment, to get more than just a diagnosis, to include all the symptoms that lead you and the patient to the diagnosis. So what the person's distress looks like, what their depression, anxiety, or their anger problems or whatever look like, to describe it succinctly, but as fully as necessary. Also in this first box, you need to write down the opposite side of that same coin, namely their purpose in coming to see you, what their goals are. Of course, as we've said before, this might simply be to get rid of the problem, not to be depressed anymore, or not to be anxious all the time, or not to be irritable all the time, not to have my mood go up and down all the time. By the way, you sometimes hear people talk about SMART goals, but I don't think we need to talk about SMART goals here, not necessarily. It's a great acronym, but it's more to do with project management than with clinical work. So I think we can be better off just listening to what the patient says that they want to achieve, what their goals are. But meantime, just in case you're wondering, SMART is an acronym which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time specified. Great for projects, but not so smart for use with patients. Okay, so that's your first box completed. You know what the problem is, and you know what their goals are, so you're off to a terrific start. Incidentally, when writing down the goals, it is important to agree them with the patient. They are the patient's goals, after all, and it's useful for you both to have a clear image of what you're trying to achieve. So while the patient might arrive saying their aim is to be not depressed, not anxious, not moody or whatever, it's useful for you both to turn that around if you can, so that you can write down something positive you can actually envisage. Living a relaxed, energetic, and predictable life. Sounds nice. If you do that, then it gives you something you can both aim for, something you can both envisage and work towards. Right, so now I'm going to contradict exactly what I just said, but it's okay, it will all work out eventually. There is actually a difference between working towards positive goals and alleviating distress. They're not actually quite the same thing. And not everybody wants you to work towards positive goals with them. Plenty of people simply want you to help them alleviate their distress and let them get on with sorting out the rest of their lives by themselves. This is why to have a problem-solving attitude, a problem-solving mentality, and actually to be good at problem-solving works out very well. It works for both. It helps you help the person sort out whatever is their problem. It works to help those you want to, or who want you to help them strive towards some great positive goals as well. The idea of problem solving is a simple one, and we'll come back to it in a later module, and so note it up at the moment that it's a great idea, is problem solving. Now, if you haven't actually got the form in front of you, let me tell you that the next thing we address is actually a run of 3 things. And they're all about what has caused the problem. What has caused the problem? They are these. What predisposed the person to have the problem they've got? What precipitated the arrival of the person's problem? And thirdly, what perpetuates the person's problem? What keeps it going? Why doesn't it just dwindle and disappear? So let's tackle the first one first. What might you have found out in your assessment that you should rightly put under predisposing factor? This will be things like genetic factors, where maybe a parent or grandparent had problems similar to the ones your patient is describing. Or it could be factors around the person's upbringing, where it was traumatic in some way, including lacking in essential elements like nurturing and caring and fun. Or it could be never having learned certain life skills, like how to get a good night's sleep, how to regulate your emotions, how to tolerate distress, how to get along with other people, or what makes a rewarding life, and so on. Or it could be something very basic, but very, very important, like not taking exercise or eating a really bad diet. Lots of people still think that there's little or no link between biological factors and psychological factors, between the mind and body. And the evidence is just the reverse. There's lots of linkage between the two. So anything you think may have predisposed the person to develop the problems they now have, write it or them in the predisposing box. Now let's have a look at the precipitating section. What triggered the problem to occur right now, or whenever it did occur? Because actually there are 2 types of precipitating. For example, you might be seeing a person who is 30 years old and they tell you that they've been depressed since they were 20. Well, it would be natural enough and important enough for you to inquire what precipitated them to become depressed at 20 when you're doing the assessment. So if you did, write that down here in that box. And the same with any other problems, of course. If the person is, say, very anxious or whatever since the age of 20, what precipitated it happening just then? And there is the more immediate form of precipitating. So you might have asked your patient, what precipitates a bout of depression? What sparks it off? For example, they might have been inclined to have depression since the age of 20, but it's recurring bout. So what sparks a particular bout off? Or what precipitates a panic attack? What triggers one? Or what precipitates you losing your temper? What triggers it? And so on. Or depending what their problem is. By the way, you may be thinking that these would be really good questions to ask, but you didn't actually ask them. Well, that's okay. The case formulation is a living document. It develops as you get to know the person better. Obviously, you try to fit it in as well as you can straight after the assessment, and you try to do your assessment well enough so that you can fill in a good case formulation, but it is actually unlikely that you ever do such a perfect assessment that you can complete a perfect case formulation. It develops. So, as and when you discover the precipitating factors, write them down in the precipitating box. By the way, you've probably noticed an awful lot of P's occurring, words beginning with P. And that is why this structure for the case formulation is often referred to as the 6 P's case formulation. Problem, predisposing factors, precipitating factors, perpetuating factors. And we'll come on to the others in a minute. Okay, so we've got the problem, the patient's purpose or goals in coming to see you, the predisposing factors, the precipitating factors, and hopefully you're matching this up with one of your patients insofar as you can. If not, it's not too late to start. I think perpetuating factors are actually my favorite P. After all, if we can work out what the perpetuating factors are, what's keeping the problem going, in other words, we have the key to resolving it. So what sort of things that you'll find in your assessment will you be writing down here? It could be some of the same things that you put under predisposing factors. Things like not taking enough exercise, eating a poor diet, not knowing how to regulate your emotions, not knowing how to tolerate distress, not knowing what constitutes a rewarding life, and so on. All of those would perpetuate the problem. Or it could be things that are more current. For example, not having a partner when they would like one. Or having a partner but quarrelling with them. Or being generally lonely, or having lots of arguments with people, or being in a job that doesn't suit them. Or not having enough money, or anything like that. So both of those, in other words, current factors like that and predisposing factors that are still there, all of those count as perpetuating factors. And you might remember, if you've done the assessment module, that I promised you would be more expert on the person's problem than even they are. And the person themselves, of course, will be a very good expert on their own problem. But I think you can see how we are getting a deeper understanding about it than even they may have. I doubt if they've done a 6 P's case formulation on their problem. We now know what the problem is in some detail, what their goal would be, what predisposes them to have this problem, what precipitated it coming to the fore, and what's keeping it going or perpetuating it. And of course, you may remember from the module on functional analysis, if you did that, about the problem sometimes fulfilling a really useful function for the patient. If that's the case, and you can specify what the function is, then this is where it goes, in the perpetuating factors. The kind of thing we're talking about is where for some depressed people, the function of their depressive symptoms, withdrawal, lowering of activity levels and so on, means they're no longer able to do the job they hate, or talk much to their partner they find unrewarding, and so on. You can see it actually fulfills some useful function.
Just to stop for a second, we've got a few hands up, which is lovely to see that you're participating, but unfortunately, due to the numbers, we can't take questions from the audience. But if you're able to pop them in chat, then I can stop the audio and ask Will if you've got any questions at all. So just let us know.
In other depressed people, that same withdrawal and lowering may serve the function of protecting them from unsustainably active and successful lifestyles they've created. So it's worth reminding ourselves to look for a function in a person's problems, and also reminding ourselves that the problem doesn't always serve a function. Well, that's the problem and what prompted it to happen and what keeps it going. So let's have a look at the positive and protective factors. What did you find in your assessment that was positive and protective for the patient? Probably lots. These are actually really important. When I was at school, my dad used to go on at me that I shouldn't spend so much time on all the school subjects that I liked and was already good at. I should concentrate more on developing the subject I wasn't very good at and I didn't like. And to be fair to him, that wasn't unusual. It sounds a bit backwards, inside out and the wrong way around, but the idea was to get what they called a balanced education. That's why the idea was to relax about the subjects you already have a natural ability for and spend more time developing the ones that you are useless at. So it's kind of logical in a funny sort of way. But there's not much fun in it, and it doesn't make you feel like going and spending all your time doing the things you know you're not good at. Well, it's the same thing when you help your patient. It's great to be an expert on the problem and ask them all about their problem, what brought it on, what keeps it going, and all that kind of thing. But it can be a pretty gloomy process for the patient, to be honest, and I suspect it can actually damage them if they go away thinking that everything they've ever touched has been a bit of a problem, and everything that has ever influenced them has done them a bit of harm. So it's very important in your assessment that you actively look for things that were positive in the person's life.
Okay, we've got a little flurry of questions. So I'm sorry, Will, enough relaxation. Here we go. Are you ready?
Yeah, I was enjoying that.
I know, I thought you were too happy. So Mal was wondering about overlying a self-report with case formulation. For example, with a patient that's seeking therapy under duress, like in care proceedings, for example. What advice have you here in turn actually obtaining a clear clinical picture to guide therapy thereafter?
There's two things to that. One is that you can, once the patient under duress picks up that you are actually there to help, then they'll suss that out. They'll sense that. If you genuinely are there to help, they will sense that quickly enough, and they'll start telling you the truth, shall we say. I'm not speaking emptily either, because I spent 10 years working with prisoners in prisons, obviously, and so on. So, but that is a really important point. The other, more sort of textbook answer, is you seek corroborative evidence from significant others of the patient.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And you mentioned that behaviours don't always have or serve a function. Are you able to provide any examples of a behaviour that doesn't serve a function?
Yes, yeah. I think the one we used as an example was depression, and I said it can serve a function. For example, you can be so depressed you withdraw from a unsustainable lifestyle. So that's gives you an excuse to withdraw, as it were. You can't do it. But equally, a person can simply be depressed, and it's not serving any good function at all. They can be low in activity level, low in mood level, low in biological functioning of various sorts. They can just be low across the board, not serving any good function whatsoever. And that is, we have to remember that. There's not always a clever function to it.
Last one for now. Do you think that this formulation can be useful for planning health procedures? For example, Benjamin needs to access someone who's scared of needles for their COVID vaccination to create a plan for how they will have their vaccination. Could you use this method? Absolutely
so. And I mean, Benjamin's really focusing on the idea of planning, and it's not something that people are very good at. So well done, Benjamin, because it's quite right. You do actually have to get a proper plan. For example, people will say, my plan is to give up drinking. Well, that's not a plan, that's an aspiration or a hope, A plan is where you actually have a step-by-step sequence to achieve your hope and aspiration. And that's what Benjamin's implying in his question, that if you're going to get your vaccination, have a needle go in you and you're terrified of needles, then there has to be some kind of plan that enables you to do that. I'll leave it at that.
Super. Okay, you can relax again for a bit, but keep the questions coming. We love them. So, okay, here we go again.
Things they are being successful at, things they like, and that you write those down here in the positive box. But in what way are protective factors different from positive factors, if at all? We've put them in the same box after all. Well, examples of protective factors might be that a person has a good diet, They take good exercise. They have a job that suits them. They have enough money that you don't have to worry about money. They should all be great things and built to protect most people from lots of harm that might happen to them. So it is good to note these down, to be aware of them and to nurture them in our plans. And I think that's about all there's to say about those. But don't be misled. We might not have said much about protective factors and positive factors, but they are very important. The psychological idea and justification behind saying that is that of self-efficacy or self-efficacy. You hear it pronounced both ways. Maybe pronounce it self-efficacy. It's easier to pronounce it that way. So, self-efficacy is all to do with being effective in the world. Or, more to the point, if you choose to tackle something, you believe that you will probably succeed at it. Any task you put your mind to, you'll probably be able to succeed at it. Such a person has high feelings of self-efficacy. And of course, somebody with low feelings of self-efficacy feels that even if they put their mind to a task, they probably won't succeed at it. We can see the importance then. If you think you are not likely to succeed at a task, even if you put your mind to it, then what's the point in trying? Sit back in a stupor and not try anything. What's the point in planning your life ahead? There's no point in having a plan because you probably won't be able to carry it through anyway. So, feelings of self-efficacy, believing that you can succeed, very important.
Just a couple more. Can this formulation be used for individuals experiencing a mental health crisis?
Oh, very much so. Absolutely so. Spot on. Definitely yes.
And do you have an example of a protective factor?
Well, protective factors, for instance, some people take lots of exercise, which is good. They have very good sleep, which they didn't have. They'd be much more distressed. They have very good family relationships and supportive people, and so on and so forth. They're almost like the things we take for granted. When they're missing, they're really impactful. But, and of course, they can go missing. They can be there to start off with and first see the patient, but we need to tick them off and make sure they stay there. Otherwise, otherwise the patient doesn't do so well.
How many sessions do you need to have collected all information to use? How many sessions do I need to have collected all information I need to use in terms of case formulation? So how many sessions?
Well, one gets you off to a start. After one session, you aim to get enough assessment, do enough in assessment to get you off to a good case formulation. But of course, if you're going to see the person subsequently, then more information just comes in automatically just by talking to the person and what's going on in their life. More information comes in automatically, and you build that into the formulation. So it's a living document. It develops as you go on, unless, one exception, unless you're just seeing the person for one therapy, single session therapy. In which case, it's one of the main things in single session therapy is to produce a case formulation like this, and the person can take it away with them and act on it by themselves.
Are positive and protective factors two different things?
I think, well, strictly speaking, yes, but I probably think it's not worth going into the semantics of that at the moment.
And do these protective factors have to be perceived to be protective to the patient before addressing them, or can you bring them into their focus?
Good point. No, I think, well, such a good question. Very often we can spot good things that are going on for the patient, and they have not spotted them. And it is quite right, as that person's alluding to, kind of alert them to it. I mean, for instance, when a person is depressed, they can be almost blind to all the good things that are happening around them. So for us to help them to see those things is great.
And Araminta's put that he or she often says that a big protective positive factor is that they are seeking engaging with the therapy in the first place. It's a nice place to start with the patient.
Fantastic. Yeah, spot on.
Okay, off we go again.
Just one example, a classic study by Miller and Sanchez showed that increasing self-efficacy was a higher order factor in therapy of adolescents in their case. In other words, any therapy that we do that increases the person's self-efficacy tended to be effective. So for us, it's important that we have the person talk about the things they succeed in, about the things they are good in their lives, things they've done well, to have them talk about it and prompt them to talk about it in a non-patronizing, straightforward kind of way. It's very crucial to our plans to help the patient. So there we are. We have made sense of the assessment. We know what the patient's problems are. We know what they want out of therapy. We're really expert on the problem, what predisposes the person to develop the problem, what predisposes them to have these problems, what precipitated it to occur right now, what precipitated it to start off in the first place, and what perpetuates it, what keeps it going. And very importantly, we know what positives there are in their lives and what protective factors are around. The only thing we have left to do is to make a plan to help them. So you can probably guess what the next module is about, or at least the next module in my mind. Having said that, let's just say something about the plan right now. Not least because there is a box labelled exactly that on the case formulation form I've put in your resources. It's labelled Plan. You'll be wanting to put something in that box, and I'm guessing there will be lots of things shouting out to be put in there. For instance, if you've got a good notion of what your patient's goals are, I'm sure lots of ideas will have occurred to you as to how to help them achieve those goals. Well, you can write them in the plan box right now. Equally, if you've worked out what is perpetuating their problem, what is sustaining it, then I'm sure you'll have lots of ideas about how to undermine those factors that are working against your patient's interests. And the same, if you can see what positives your patient has in their life, it'll be almost irresistible to work on developing those positives so that they gradually displace the negatives that your patient has working against them. So I'm sure all of these things will occur to you straight away without any effort, and this is where you write them down, in the plan box. It's just that I'm very fond of the planning section, and that's why it's a whole section all of its own. But meantime, plan away to your heart's content.
Okay, the questions are pouring in now, so I'm sorry if I don't get to everyone, so I'll try and do a nice range. Would this formulation be appropriate for young people or children who may not have the self-awareness to be able to identify their problem or their goals?
Absolutely, yes. The only thing I'd say, though, is that we tend to emphasize, as therapists, we tend to emphasize open questions. And they're very good at open questions, but so are closed questions. And you can actually offer goals and problems and so on to children in particular. You can also do it with adults. And you can offer them rather like a menu. What would your goal be? This, 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 or this. And they can choose. You can help them choose, just like a menu. And they can say, none of those. And you can say, well, what about this, this, and this? It's just exactly like a menu. And it's people don't use that enough, I don't think. It's a very good thing to do.
Okay, and from Olivia, is it always helpful to share case formulations with clients?
Oh, golly, the correct answer is yes. But I can think of people where it's really not. In particular, when people are prone to violence, it can actually be quite difficult to share your formulation. But those kind of people are actually quite exceptional. So let's stick with the correct answer. Yes, not only share it, but actually develop it with them.
Kayan is struggling to see the difference between or differentiate between predisposing and precipitating factors. They know that the predisposing refers to genetic factors, but is there an easy way to remember what precipitating factors are?
Yeah, well, let's look at a couple of examples of precipitating factors. You can have, like big precipitating factors, like your partner leaves you. That'd be a big precipitating factor of various problems. Or you lose your job, or you have a serious accident. These would be huge precipitating factors. But you can also have kind of what seems to be little to us precipitating factors, like, a friend of mine walks past me in the street without saying hello. And that can precipitate me into a decline if I'm predisposed to be that way. So those kind of things precipitate it, trigger it. Trigger is another word for it, to trigger the problem.
Super. One more. What would you recommend when there are very few positives, as often reported by the later life patients? So isolation, poor health, COVID isolation, multiple bereavements in family and friends. So almost being the last one left alive in a circle of family and friends.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think it's a really good question to which there isn't a simple answer. On the other hand, all those things are so true, they can actually blind the person concerned and us to anything good that's happened. Because I was talking to an old lady, and what was she saying? She was saying how her husband had died, and she was terribly upset by that. But she was also saying there are compensations, like she can watch soppy movies. And I thought she was joking for a minute, because it's like a small compensation. But no, she wasn't joking at all. And she went through one or two compensations like that. And most people are kind of blinded to those small things because the other things are so big.
Fabulous. We've got lots of questions. Better carry on for now, but keep them coming. And if anyone wants to put them to everybody rather than just to panelists, often there's some brilliant ideas that come up in chat in case we don't get to you as well. But carry on for the moment.
I don't want to go on too much. Obviously, I'm going to go on too much, but I just want to tell you how this kind of case formulation can work out. It's an example. I was seeing a man of about 40, let's call him Joe, and Joe was involved in charity work, and he was also depressed, and was also taken to drinking too much. He had pretty clear goals, filling in the first box. He wanted to stop drinking too much, he wanted to be not depressed, and he wanted to get on better with his wife, although he felt that if he stopped drinking too much, then that would naturally lead to them getting on better. Predisposing factors were that he had always been volatile, as he put it, that he said he was always a bit moody. Precipitating factors were tricky, although he was fairly sure that the depression had come on, or at least become noticeable, some while after starting his charity work, although he was very clear that he enjoys his charity work, enjoyed it very much, in fact. Perpetuating factors included drinking too much and not getting on with his wife. It's funny because that was sort of the problem, but it was also perpetuating his global depression sort of thing. Not getting on with her as well as he wanted to. Both of those seemed to exacerbate his depression. Also, as part of his charity work, he travelled extensively, and in doing so found himself involved in some extramarital sexual activity, which he had very mixed feelings about. He described being delighted on each occasion, but it gradually wearing down his image of himself. And it was clear that he and his wife were basically well suited, and that was the relationship he wanted to maintain. On the positives, there were lots really. He was a very articulate man to the extent of being downright charming. He was intelligent and inclined to be energetic. But I've missed out on an important precipitating factor. I think, to be fair, I've missed out on lots of things for the sake of brevity, but an important precipitating factor was the gradual decline in his social circle, particularly of his male friends. Again, he linked this with his new charity role, though again, he was eager to say how much he was enjoying and committed to that role. I found him very interesting and a very likable guy, a very likable patient. And like so many people who see us, he was very depressed by the time he arrived for therapy. Suicidally so, in fact. So no doubt you've mentally filled out the boxes and may even now be staring at them, just as I did. The great thing about filling out the boxes is you can stare at them for as long as you like and see what logical picture emerges from them. It seemed to be clear that the precipitating factor was him taking up his charity role, and yet he was very keen on this role. And therein lay the solution, in a funny sort of way. It turns out he was so keen that other things had gone by the board, most notably his male friendships, and indeed the relationship with his wife, for one reason and another. Oddly, but not actually unusually, for someone who was so depressed, the solution was at least clear and straightforward, if not easy. It was, of course, to work on reinstating his male friendships, which was not difficult. He did this easily once he had seen the importance of it, and he saw the importance of it really by talking about things and describing it. And similarly, another part was to plan out how to improve his relationship with his wife, obviously, and to reduce his drinking, to plan out how to achieve both of those. Those are aspirations, and he needed to plan out how, we both needed to plan out how to achieve those aspirations. And these weren't quite so easy, especially because one was linked with the other. But both proved doable with detailed planning and support. Another part of the jigsaw was to eliminate the extramarital sexual contact, something that he had very mixed feelings about, as I said, but he was ultimately clear that he wanted to do it. So there we are. That's an example of case formulation. Not at all rocket science once you fill it in the boxes. Though I must admit, it's like all successful cases, when you look back on them, they seem very straightforward, a bit like a jigsaw once you've completed it. So that's case formulation. As ever, I suggest you assimilate this session before going on to another one.
Okay, while we're assimilating, you ready for some questions, Will?
Yeah.
How do you work on a formulation with somebody who is lacking in insight, for example, in denial that medication non-compliance is a contributing factor to their current problem?
I think the short answer is you talk to them, and the Socratic dialogue is the correct answer. You ask them questions which cause them to think. And Socratic dialogue is a great idea because it causes them to think and it causes us to think. We're not always right either. So we think along together and come to jointly agreed conclusions, if you like.
Nice. Is there a theoretical model behind the 5 Ps?
Not really. The first time I came across it was in some of the early books on cognitive behavioral therapy. So I think they could justifiably claim it as theirs. But it's been adopted by just about everybody. It's used right across the board.
Super. And there's some nice answers to that one in the chat box.
Great.
So I think on that note, we can skip to the last slide.
You can take off the dog.
I've taken off the dog. We've still got this one. If anybody wants more information on the higher order therapy, you need to go to aptonlinetraining.com, and then there's the different modules there. A few people have asked about the form, so you'll be able to find that in the module there. Do you want to do the meerkats, Will?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just to say the event is completely free of charge as part of our response to COVID. So thank you for attending it. It's not intended to be fundraising. It's not. There's no mechanism for making a voluntary contribution. It's just nice to do. And thank you everyone for coming. We're not sure how many of these sessions we're going to do. It does depend on how long COVID lasts and how much interest there is. And today, I think it's probably our biggest turnout ever, isn't it, Amy?
Yeah, I think we've had well over 500 people here. So amazing.
So that's lovely. And yeah, the certificate of attendance will be emailed. Well, that's your department, really, Ames, isn't it? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, Mark and I are working on that. So we'll have that under control. And a lot of people have asked for the website that we just showed, which was, let me see if I can get that one back. So that's where you can find more details on higher order therapy if you'd like. And or also, sorry, a lot of questions have asked about next week's webinars, and they're always on our website, which are apt.ac, just www.apt.ac. And then type in the search box, free webinars, and you'll find all the details there. You happy with everything, Rob?
I'm very happy. Yes, that's wonderful. Thanks. So what do we do? Are we going to leave it open for people to hang around and chat to each other if they want to?
Yeah.
There's some good contributions, aren't there?
Yeah, there's some lovely contributions. So if you scan through the chat, if you've asked a question that we haven't been able to answer, maybe some lovely answers there. Or in case anyone's missed it, you could pop it up again. And everyone seems to be super helpful in the chat. So always worth a try. But we will be hanging around as well for a little bit.
Are you going to put music on or just going to leave
I've
that
put
up?
a little bit of music. I'm sorry, it was a bit varied before. So
Oh,
I'll make it a little less varied and a little more chilled. But before we go, just to say, I hope to see you again next week and love seeing you all again and love all the chats. So fabulous to be here again.
Lovely. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.